It's time to move ahead, and we will be listening to our keynote speakers. I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Vikas Sharma, who has truly inspiring journey of his life in literature. Professor Vikas Sharma is distinguished academician, poet, and novelist. He has authored several acclaimed books and novels, including Love's Not Time's Fool, Hope Against Hope, and Treatment of History in Indian English Novel. With over 50 published research papers and a strong record of research supervision, Professor Sharma is widely recognized for his scholarly depth and leadership in English studies. He has served as a principal, held key academic positions, and is actively involved in national and international literary forums. His work as editor-in-chief of reputed journals and organizer of major seminars and literary festivals reflects his commitment to enriching the academic and literary community. Let's welcome Sir by giving him a round of applause.
Are you ready? My dear students, it is a keynote address. Generally, I avoid paper reading. I'm an extempore speaker. But because it is a presidential address, it's a conference president address, that is why it is supposed that I must speak in a concrete way. And as I earlier told you, I'm a novelist. I write novels. But when I am asked to speak on this topic, emerging practices in contemporary language literature, then for a week, I consulted the books and tried to interact with you in a proper manner. Because it will be a history, academic history, that was a keynote address. Generally, international seminars and national seminars, keynote addresses are very important. They are considered as literary legacy, academic legacy. That's why आपको मैं bore नहीं करूँगा. और within 45 minutes, whatever I have observed about the emerging trends in language and literature, I will discuss and you will really enjoy. आप मुझे थोड़ा माहौल दीजिए मुझे सुनने का. My topic is beyond boundaries, multi-modal approaches to language and literature. Beyond boundaries, multi-modal approaches to language and literature. In a very simple English, I've just tried to express myself. And if you read my novels, Google my name, Professor Vikas Sharma, novelist, you will find my novels are in very simple, lucid language. You will enjoy. You need not consult any Google, any dictionary, because I try to connect myself with the young generation. My dear students, a lot is changing in the way we speak. A lot is changing in the way we speak. I have to go attend a conference, a function in Bhopal tonight. That's why I'm in the hurry and I will take only 30 minutes. A lot is changing in the way we speak, read, write, and even think. English is not just a language anymore. It is a space where values meet, where cultures meet, where old and new collide. Stories are not just told on paper. As a writer, as a fictionist, as a storyteller, I say one thing, that stories are not just told on paper. They live on screens. It sounds bliss. In hashtags, in games, people switch between languages, mix traditions, blend genres, and it works. This research, whatever I did, looks at what is emerging. The topic is emerging practices in contemporary language and literature. I would confine myself to language and literature both. My dear students, this research looks at what is emerging. The shift from page to digital, from the monolingual to the multilingual, and English as a second language. When literature carries the weight of climate change, social justice, identity, and inclusion. Professor Sachdeva is here, a London scholar, and I would like to seek his feedback after this keynote address. These changes are not just trained, they mirror the world we live in. Global, connected, complex, and constantly changing. English is keeping up and in many ways leading the way. In my previous short speech, I focused on this point. We must own up English language instead of abhorring English language, and we must try to propagate Indian sensibility, Indian ethos, Indian culture, Indian values, and even Indian language also. I always say, we cannot speak like the English. We cannot like the English. We must speak in Indian way, Indianized English. And I quote Salman Rushdie, literature is where I go to explore the highest and lowest places in human society and human spirit, unquote. Salman Rushdie, you already know, contemporary practices expand its explanatory potential. Literature and language never stand still. They evolve constantly. I am very much in problem because I am giving my keynote address to students of engineering college. Had them student literature, I would not feel so much uncomfortable. That's why I am very serious. They evolve constantly, responding to the world around them. The 20th century has brought dramatic changes, I can say drastic changes, to how we communicate and tell stories. As a writer, I feel this problem. Globalization has accelerated the exchange of literary traditions across cultures. It is becoming more common to see writers weaving different languages into a single narrative. They shift, and this shift mirrors real-life multilingual realities and complicates the old expectation that literature should conform to a single linguistic or cultural framework. I here remember a very famous Nigerian author, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, a very famous name. She once observed the single story creates stereotypes, and the problems with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete, unquote. Her insight captures a broader movement in contemporary writing, a growing resistance in simplified narratives, and a deepening interest in layered, pluralistic storytelling. At the same time, the climate crisis has sparked a wave of literary innovation. In The Great Derangement, Amitabh Ghosh is a very well-known name in Indian English fiction. Amitabh Ghosh argues that environmental collapse is not just a political or scientific problem. It is a cultural problem. It is also a cultural one, and more specifically, a failure of the imagination. For many writers today, traditional narratives forms fall short when it comes to representing the scale and complexity of ecological change. As a result, new genres like climate fiction, or you can say cli-fi, are emerging, often experimenting with narrative structure to reflect ecological interdependence and deep time. Pin drop silence पढ़ाते हैं class में. Concept that stretch far beyond the human experience. Technology is changing the shape of storytelling to interactive fiction. I am talking of interactive fiction. Interactive fiction and digital narratives are no longer just gimmicks or side projects. They are redefining what it means to be reader. Instead of passively observing a story, readers are being invited to make choices, shape outcomes, and even correlate meaning and co-create meaning. These digital experiments go far beyond simple hyperlinks or clickable editings. They challenge long-standing ideas about authorship, authority, and the line between the creator and the consumer. You are the consumer, I am the creator. I am a writer, I am a novelist, and you are my reader. Presently, you are like a consumer. Meanwhile, questions of identity have taken center stage in literature. The influence of intersectionality. I use the term intersectionality. The students of literature, they know this term, a term coined by a legal scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, has encouraged writers to explore how identities overlap and intersect in ways that are often overlooked. Race, gender, sexuality, class, disability, none of these categories exist in isolation. And today's literature is far more attuned to complexity of these lived relations. Instead of flat archetypes, you can say symbolic figures, characters are portrayed as textured, multifaceted individuals shaped by many social forces at once. A similar shift is happening in how literature relates to power. Writers are actively challenging the authority of the Western literary canon. Here I can talk about Indian politics. That is very important when we talk of Indian knowledge system. Unfortunately, I am working on a book on Indian politics. The book very soon will come in the market in the month of May. This move towards decolonizing literature. Sachdeva sir, I use the word decolonizing literature goes beyond changing content. It means rethinking the assumptions that underline literary value itself. Who decides what counts as literature? What makes a work important and universal? These questions are now central to literary discourse, and the answers are reshaping what is published, studied, and celebrated. The rise of visual storytelling. My dear friends, I am talking of visual storytelling, particularly the growing literary recognition of graphic novels. I think you might have read graphic novels. Shows how traditional text is being reimagined in combination with usual media. These works do not just illustrate the story, they are the story. They using images and text in tandem to communicate meaning. It is a reflection of a wider cultural shift towards multimodal communication where meaning is crafted across different formats, not just within lines of prose. Taken together, these literary shifts reflect broader changes in how we communicate, how we understand the world, and how we relate to each other. Globalization has opened up new channels of cultural exchange. I am talking of cultural exchange. Due to globalization in 1991, P.V. Narasimha Rao, the Prime Minister of India, and Manmohan Singh was the Finance Minister of India. Globalization has opened up new channels of cultural exchange while also raising tough questions about which language and traditions dominate. Climate change demands narratives. Climate change demands narratives that are expansive and inclusive of the non-human. Identity politics and identity politics. Identity politics has expanded the range of stories being told and kinds of living being centered. If you read a very famous book written by Mayank Gandhi, Up Down, you will find identity crisis in the case of Arvind Kejriwal. Post-colonial theory offers a hopeful lens for understanding many of these developments. I remember a very famous name, Homi Bhabha. Homi Bhabha's idea of hybridity, for example, captures how writers often borrow from dominant literary forms in order to reshape them, challenging culture hierarchies from within. This kind of strategic borrowing, what some might call cultural remixing, shows how literature can serve both as critique and creation. In all these ways, literature continues to evolve, not passively, but in dialogue with the world around it. Writers are stretching the boundaries of form, language, and voice, often in response to urgent social, political, and environmental pressures. Far from being in decline, literature is alive with experimentation, transformation, and resistance. My dear friends, as I told you, I have worked on this topic for a week. This study of mine has drawn on qualitative research, noted in close reading, critical theory, and contemporary linguistic analysis. Professor Sachdeva is a man of linguistic phonetics. That is why I am very much scared. I cannot poke my nose into linguistic and phonetics. मैं बहुत डरता हूँ इनसे linguistic के आदमी हैं. These works were analyzed alongside scholarly commentary in order to trace key developments and categorize different significant shifts in narrative technique and thematic focus. Over the past 2 decades, the way people communicate online has changed dramatically. What began as simple text-based messaging has evolved into a rich, dynamic form of expression that blend words, visuals, and cultural references or increasingly creative ways. This shift has given rise to what many now refer to digital language. Digital language, a loose, constantly evolving system communication shaped by internet culture, social media platforms, and need for speed and brevity in everyday interaction. My dear friends, unlike traditional forms of written communication, digital language is not bound by rigid grammatical rules or grammar rules or formal structure. Nowadays, as a novelist, I learned this language, literary slangs, from my own students of UG and PG in my own university, Meerut. Instead, I am working on this book also, how the young generation, they use the different slangs, because I am not so much aware of all these slangs. Instead, it thrives on flexibility and can contest. People often rely on abbreviations like LOL, LOL, IDK, or BRB, BRB. Emojis, GIFs, even deliberate misspellings to convey tone and emotion, something that is difficult to capture through text alone. A simple message like "I'm fine" can take on entirely different meaning depending on whether it is followed by a period, a smiley face, or a crying emoji. My dear friends, in many ways, digital language mirrors the way we speak. It allows for hesitation, exaggeration, so tired, and emotional nuance that standing writing doesn't always capture. And because it is so closely tied to the platforms where it lives, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, group chats, it changes fast. Words or phrases that are popular one week can feel outdated the next week. Are you enjoying? I am trying to make myself very simple because I studied engineering colleges. What makes this form of communication especially interesting is how it reflects broader cultural movements. A lot of popular internet slang today, for example, has roots in African American vernacular English and LGBTQ communities. My dear friends, I have written a book on LGBTQ, Beyond the Rainbow, and the book is published from Philippines, showing how digital spaces can amplify certain voices and styles. Phrases like "no cap," "it's giving," or "slay" have gone mainstream, often without people fully realizing where they came from, or what they originally meant. There is also a certain platforms and playfulness in how digital language is used. It is not uncommon to see users stresses out the word "yes," a switch between upper case and lower case for effect. My dear students, with the increasing presence of artificial intelligence, Madam was very smartly talking about artificial intelligence, and I was paying my heed to her discourse. With the increasing presence of artificial intelligence, AI, particularly in the form of chatbots, text generators, and content recommendation systems, digital language is now interacting with machine-driven communication in unprecedented ways. Tools like ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, others can mimic human writing patterns, generate conversational responses, even replicate internet slang with surprising accuracy. This introduces both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, AI systems can support communication, helping people brainstorm ideas, summarize conversations, or interact across language barriers. There is also the risk that AI systems may flatten or homogenize language. While they are trained on massive data sets, they sometimes lack an understanding of cultural things. In recent years, my dear friends, literature has become a powerful space for conversations about the environment. As the planet faces rising temperatures, deforestation, and disappearing species, writers are turning to stories to explore with all its means, not just ironically, not just scientifically, but emotionally, culturally, and spiritually. This is where eco-criticism comes. Eco-criticism. I am talking of eco-criticism. I supervised a PhD to my student on eco-criticism. It is a way of looking at literature that asks, how do we see nature in the stories we tell? And what does they say about us? But while eco-criticism feels like a modern response to a modern crisis, the idea of being connected to the natural world has been around for a very long time, especially in ancient English thought. A text like Vedas, Upanishads, Ramayana, and Mahabharata, nature is not just a backdrop. It is alive. It is alive. It is divine. Rivers or goddess, The trees are sacred and the forests are places of learning, healing and transformation. These stories do not separate people from the environment. They show us as a part of larger web of life. Here I remember Mahakavi Kalidas and his very famous play Abhigyan Shakuntalam. When Shakuntala is leaving the place of her father, Kanvarishis ashram, then Kalidas makes him say, Kanvarishis कहलवाते हैं, पातुम ने प्रथमम वैसे जरूरत जिस्मास पीते सुया नादत्ते मंडना पिस्नेहन या पल्लवम आद्य व कुसुम प्रसूति समय यस्या भवत्यतु सवे और सेयम याति शकुंतला पतिग्रहम सर्वे अनुग्रायताम. ये वो शकुंतला है जो बिना पौधों को पानी पिलाए पानी नहीं पीती थी. ये वो शकुंतला है जब पहला पौधा आता था तो उसको इसलिए नहीं तोड़ती थी कि फूल से प्यार करती थी, इसलिए सारे पशु पक्षियों सारी प्रकृति इसे अलाउ करो कि अपने पति के घर जा रही है, ये खुश रहे. दैट इज कॉल्ड एफिनिटी विद नेचर, इको क्रिटिसिज्म. माय डियर फ्रेंड्स, हियर आई रिमेंबर कालिदास अगेन इन मेघदूत. बेसिकली आई बिलोंग टू हिंदी फैमिली. My father is a professor of Hindi and my brother is a Hindi poet. That's why I have read all these texts during my graduation. In Meghdoot, you know Meghdoot, cloud messenger. Kalidas turns a rain cloud into a living emotional being, a traveler, a messenger, a symbol of language and connection. The landscape is not just described, it is felt. The mountains, rivers, forests and skies are infused with mood and memory. Nature becomes a character of its own, not just background decoration. Similarly, in Ritu Sanghar is another work by Kalidas. You belong to Madhya Pradesh, you are very fortunate. Kalidas was born in Ujjaini. Similarly, in Ritu Sanghar, he paints the six Indian seasons with vivid detail that the reader can almost feel the heat, smell the flowers, hear the rustling of leaves. How can I complete this keynote address without Kalidas in Indian literature? My dear friends, Kalidas' work shows a kind of harmony between nature and humans and environment, a recognition that nature and emotion are intertwined. This writing does not treat nature as something separate from human experience, but as something essential to it. But I cannot forget even William Wordsworth when he says, one impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral evil and of good than all the sages can. दुनिया भर के संत महात्मा भी उतना अच्छा नहीं पढ़ा सकते जितना नेचर पढ़ा सकती है. My dear friends, if you love a human being, if you love a girl, if you love a boy, it is possible that you may be cheated, you may be beguiled. But if you love nature, nature will never betray you if you love nature. This perspective is deeply ecological, even if the term eco-criticism did not exist back then. Remember one thing, Kalidas was unaware of the term eco-criticism. But I am talking of Indian knowledge system. Our Indian culture is so rich. We need not think about Western thing. We need not go back to Western thing. We should think about our own culture, own tradition. That is why I always urge the Indian writers, Indian research scholars that they must concentrate on Indian knowledge, Indian sensibility. But ancient India, literature and lit India reminds us of what it looks like to live in balance with nature. Whether it is the worship of rivers, the reverence for animals, or the idea of dharma as including care for the earth. हम पृथ्वी का सम्मान करते हैं, पृथ्वी को पूजा करते हैं. These texts carry a quiet but a powerful message. This planet is not something we own, it is something we belong to. In many ways, returning, देखिए क्योंकि एक की नोट है, इतनी दूर से मैं आया हूँ तो मुझे पे टाइम पूरा बोलना होगा, अदरवाइज लोग कहेंगे की नोट स्पीक बहुत छोटा था. In many ways, returning to these old stories feels like moving forward. They offer ways of thinking that are not just poetic or religious, but deeply ecological, rooted in respect, responsibility, and sense that everything is connected. Authors like Margaret Atwood and Amitabh Ghosh, they explore environmental catastrophes through fiction. Amitabh Ghosh argues, I quote, the climate crisis is also a crisis of culture, as I just said, and thus of the imagination, unquote. These works not only raise awareness about environmental issues, but also reimagine human-nature relationship. My dear friends, English used to come with rules, polished accents, grammar books, and the weight of colonial history. But over time, something shifted. The language started to bend, to stretch, to absorb other tongues. And now it is full of echoes of other places, other rhythms, other homes, especially in India. English is not just a second language. I just said now we have become habitual of speaking English, writing in English. That's why the time has gone that we must not hate English. We must own up English as our own language, right? And it is a second skin. It is a second skin. People speak in taxis, even boardrooms, railway stations, airports, classrooms, and WhatsApp chats. And it slips it and out of Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, sometimes mid-sentence. And the writers like me, they have turned that lived experience into art. Here I remember again Salman Rushdie. You know Salman Rushdie? Salman Rushdie, very famous writer. Salman Rushdie played it first, bold and unapologetic, letting Hindi Urdu words. We cannot hate Urdu. Urdu is our language, हमारी मौसी है. कुमार कहता है मेरा भाई उर्दू मौसी है, मैं मौसी के घर आया हूँ, मैं हिंदी का कवि हूँ और मैं अपनी मौसी के घर आया हूँ. और मौसी ज़्यादा प्रिय है माँ से ज़्यादा. मौसी बहुत प्यार देती है, वो माँ से ज़्यादा प्यार देती है. डोंट हेट उर्दू. उर्दू को मत डालो इन नेताओं के चक्कर में, राजनेताओं के चक्कर में. राइट? बोल्ड एंड अनअपोलोजेटिक, letting Hindi Urdu words still across English pages in Midnight Children. In Midnight Children. सचदेवा सर, मैं आपका विशेष ध्यान चाहता हूँ. Arundhati Roy followed with the novel God of Small Things. God of Small Things. Writing English that did not sound like anyone else. It was soaked in Malayalam, childhood, protest and poetry. Amitabh Ghosh, in his books like Shadow Lines, makes you feel the quite multilingualism of Indian life. I use the word multilingualism of Indian life, where history is told in many voices, across languages, across oceans. Then there is Meena Kandaswamy, fires and lyrical writing poetry that flips between Tamil and English like a protest chant. I remember Kamala Das. You know Kamala Das? Kamala Das wrote My Story, a very famous autobiography, very bold, and sometimes I feel she is the first feminist in Indian literature. Kamala Das writes, Kamala Das, along with many others, gave us the vulnerability of womanhood in both Malayalam and English, moving between them like she was opening and closing doors into herself. In her poem introduction, she emphasized on the fact that she can write in English instead of Malayalam. I remember Chima Manda Goji Adichie. Chima Manda Goji Adichie, a very typical name. Critic writes in English, but you can feel the Nigerian Igbo roots in every line. In her storytelling, her tone, her silences. Jonal Tias slips Spanish into English without blinking, writing Spanglish, because that is how it sounds in his head, in his neighborhood. Here I remember Shobha Day, English. Right? All of these writers have one thing in common. They do not let English erase where they come from. Instead, they bring their language into English not as decoration, but as foundation. They do not translate their culture. I remember Khushwant Singh, his very famous novel, Train to Pakistan and Delhi. And Khushwant Singh translates the Indian sensibility into English. For example, if a girl says, मैं तो शर्म से मर गई, Khushwant Singh says, I merely died of shame. Translation, right? They let it speak for himself. As it is, multilingualism in literature is more than mixing words. It is about owning space. It is about refusing to flatten yourself to fit a language. It is writing that sounds like home. Even if home is made of many places, many past, this kind of English, messy, musical, personal, is not broken. It is blooming. These multilingual approaches, as Gloria Angelina powerful articulated, recognize that, I quote, ethnic identity is twin skin to linguistic identity. I am my own language. I am my language. My dear friends, now I talk about film and literature. And I would like to add one thing. I wrote in a book on film studies also, Female Gaze in Bollywood. In that book, I have analyzed some movies, Gangubai Kathiawadi, Lipstick Under My Burqa, Thappad, and Paglet, Bombay Begums, and Animal, Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge. I have analyzed all these movies in my book, Female Gaze in Bollywood, GAZD. In recent years, the boundaries between film and literature have become increasingly fluid. Once treated as separate artistic domains, the written word and the moving image, these two forms are now engaging in deeper, more dynamic conversations. This shift reflects a broader change in how stories are conceived, told, and experienced in a fast evolving cultural landscape. Literature today is often influenced by visual storytelling. Visual storytelling. Many contemporary novels, particularly, I am talking of popular fiction, Durjoy Datta, popular fiction, Chaitan Bhagat, adopt cinematic techniques, scene-like chapter structures, vivid imagery, and dialogue-driven narratives that echo screenplay conventions. This is not accidental. Sir, this is not accidental. The influence of film on fiction has become so strong that many writers consciously they shape their narratives with adaptability in mind. Indian authors, मैं भी बॉम्बे गया था अभी 6 महीने पहले, एक मिला था प्रोड्यूसर के, किसी मेरे नोवेल वेब सीरीज बन जाए, उसने कहा 10 लाख रुपए लूंगा उसको नोवेल को स्टोरी में बदलने में. इंडियन ऑथर्स, अच्छा चेतन भगत, अगेन दुर्जोय दत्ता, I am single. For instance, write novels that move easily from page to screen, a form of storytelling that feels instantly visual, often resembling a ready-made script. My dear friends, cinema today just do not borrow from literature. Cinema does not borrow from literature. पहले क्या होता था? लिटरेचर वाले फिल्म बनाती थी. हमारे बड़े बड़े कवि हिंदी के फिल्मों में गए गाने लिखे, गोपालदास नीरज, संतोषानंद. अब ऐसा नहीं होता. Cinema today does not just borrow from literature for plot or character, it leans into it for depth, complexity, and cultural dissonance. Filmmakers like Vishal Bharadwaj, belongs to Meerut, my own city. Filmmakers like Vishal Bharadwaj, for instance, have taken classic works such as Shakespeare's tragedies and reimagined them in uniquely Indian context. Film like Makbul, boli aage, Ankara, Haider, and mere retellings are not mere retellings. They delve into layered questions of identity, power, and morality while engaging deeply with local, social, and political realities. The cinematic works treat literature not as a distant influence, but an active conversation partner, using visual storytelling to probe the same ethical and emotional questions in their original text. Beyond mainstream cinema, we are also seeing the rise of hybrid narrative forms. I again talk about graphic novels, docufiction, interactive web-based narratives. These sit at the crossroads of film, literature, and digital culture. My dear friends, these forms do not fit neatly into one category. They often experiment with structure, blending visual and verbal storytelling in ways that encourage the reader or viewer to interact, to reflect, and even participate. I have used 3 terms: interact, reflect, and even participate. The result is near immersive and often non-linear experience that challenging traditional boundaries between genres and mediums. The topic is emerging practices in contemporary language and literature. I am confined to the topic. My dear friends, streaming platforms like Netflix and YouTube played a major role in supporting this creative cross-pollination. A novel may be adapted into a miniseries, while a limited series might inspire fan fiction or visual spin-offs line. The male gaze, I'm talking of male gaze. The male gaze has been a persistent element in Indian cinema, generating substantial debate and critical examination over the years. Encouragingly, recent years have witnessed a notable shift in thematic approaches and narrative structures within Indian cinema, moving toward more diverse. The work of Jhumpa Lahiri, whose fiction has been adapted into a film, The Namesake, directed by Meera Nair, illustrates another dimension of this evolution. Her prose, characterized by thoughtful reflection, translates effectively into visual storytelling through careful attention to tone, silence, and atmosphere. My dear friends, similarly, Hamid Qureshi's dual roles as a novelist and a screenwriter demonstrate the successful navigation of both mediums, often incorporating literary depth into immediate cinematic experiences. This convergence indicates a broader transformation, increasingly navigate a narrative culture, a movement beyond format limitations. As creators and audiences, media forms with proficiency, literature and film function not as parallel paths but as increasing one. Together, these forms create layered experiences that reflect the hybrid nature of contemporary storytelling. Gender. Gender is very important. Literature has consistently mirrored societal shifts and contemporary discussions around gender and identity have significantly transformed literary landscape. Recent years have been a marked progression towards inclusivity. I use the word inclusivity. Challenging traditional gender binaries and incorporating identities historically excluded from mainstream narratives. My dear friends, contemporary writers have moved beyond conventional templates of gendered experience, actively expanding literary spaces to include non-binary, transgender, and queer voice. I have written the book Beyond the Rainbow, The Shades of Queer Love, thereby redefining gender representation across fiction, poetry, Hosang merchant, and critical writing. This movement expands beyond thematic concerns to linguistic innovation. Authors increasingly experiment with gender-neutral pronouns, fluid sentence structures, and narrative forms that resist rigid categorization. That is a very important point I am pinpointing. Such inclusivity reflects deeper cultural transformations that view gender not as fixed but as a lived, evolving experience. Literature functions simultaneously as a personal expression and a political instrument in this ongoing transformation. There are many writers who have written the novels on emergency, China war, and even Anna movement. I was just talking about Mayank Gandhi, written a very famous book, Op's Downfall. In the Indian context, foundation writers such as Ismat Chughtai, who wrote a very famous story, Lihaf, and Mashwata Devi, right? Established critical precedents by challenging patriarchal norms and exposing intersections of gender with class and caste. Contemporary writers, including Meena Kandaswamy, Arundhati Subramanian, and Toru Dutt, explored gender bodies, domestic spaces, violence and desire, while reclaiming agency through linguistic innovation. Beyond binary representations, emerging queer and trans voices in Indian literature, including A. Ravathi, Ghazal Dhaliwal, and others, they bring attention to experiences previously absent from literary discourse in the mainstream literature. My dear friends, literary landscape has been further enriched by numerous contributions to queer literature. Again, I am coming on queer literature, LGBTQ, including Virginia Woolf, Oscar Wilde, Sarah Walters, Alice Walker. Digital media has significantly transformed accessibility to queer literature, creating expanded opportunities for both writers and the readers. Intersectionality and social justice. I am talking of Dalit literature. Am I right? Am I on the right track? Literature has consistently provided frameworks for conceptualizing justice through contemporary approaches demonstrate significant evolution. Writers increasingly employ intersectional frameworks to explore injustice in its full complexity. My dear friends, I am to Dalit literature. Exploitation of Dalit caste by the higher caste. Not as isolated instances of oppression, but as interconnected systems that overlap and interact. The term intersectionality, introduced by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, am I pronounced right? Recognizes that individuals experiences discrimination differently based on the interconnected nature of their identities, including gender, race, caste, class, sexuality, and ability. In literature, this concept has become an essential analytical tool, influencing both narrative techniques and thematic focus. Contemporary literature reflects this complexity through multi-dimensional characterization and depictions of social structures. I am talking of social structure. Rather than presenting simplified narratives of oppression, I am not talking about untouchable. I am not talking about Premchand Godan, no, and not untouchable by Mulk Raj Anand. Writers craft representations that capture the intricate manifestations of injustice in lived experiences. My dear friends, I just named one person, Om Prakash Valmiki. Have you heard the name? Om Prakash Valmiki, who wrote a very famous autobiography, Jhuthan, right? I'm going to detail, I'm concluding. Finally, these works are pushing boundaries. I use the word pushing boundaries. Authors are blending memoir with fiction, Sansmaran, memoir, poetry with prose, personal voice with collective history. I have been a debater in my school days, और मैं जानता हूं कि ब्रेविटी इज द सोल ऑफ विट. ब्रेविटी इज द सोल ऑफ विट. और संस्कृत में कहा गया है मितम च सारम च इति वाग्मिता. लेकिन मेरी मजबूरी ये है कि मेरठ चलकर आया हूं और कीनोट स्पीकर हूं, तो मुझे ढंग से बोलना होगा. द लैंग्वेज ऑफन मल्टीलिंगुअल, एक्सपेरिमेंटल, इमोशनली रॉ. These shifts reflect the realities of intersectional experience, which is rarely tidy, rarely singular, and never fully captured by one kind of voice. Emerging literary practices rooted in intersectionality are not just about inclusion, they are about interruption. They challenge the structures that have historically defined literature, the canon, the critic, and the publishing industry. Publishing industry, very yes. These questions, they question who gets to write, who gets to write, who gets to be read, and who gets to be believed. मैंने बताया कि मेरे जिस परिवार से हूँ वो हिंदी का परिवार है, तो हिंदी में एक बहस चली बहुत लंबे पहले. आप लोग मध्य प्रदेश के रहने वाले हैं, आपके यहाँ हिंदी में बहुत बड़े साहित्यकार हुए हैं, शिव मंगल सिंह सुमन आपके यहाँ हुए हैं, हरशंकर परसाई. तो हिंदी में एक बहस चली कि हिंदी की किताब का चौथा पाठक कौन. समझ रहे हैं मैं क्या बोल रहा हूँ? आई एम स्पीकिंग हिंदी. हिंदी की किताब का चौथा पाठक कौन? एक लिखने वाला, एक टाइप करने वाला, एक क्रिटिक, चौथा नहीं है. समझ गए आप? इसका मतलब क्या हुआ? कमी है रीडर्स की. द क्वेश्चन इज, द क्वेश्चन हु गेट्स टू राइट, who gets to be read, who gets to believe. In that sense, literature becomes more than representation, it becomes action, it becomes part of the long, unfinished work of justice. Discourse in language and literature. Madam Rekha, discourse in its simplest form is more than just language. It is the way language is used to shape thought, identity, and power. In literature, discourse is not only what is said, but also how, why, and by whom it is said. आप समझ में क्या बोल रहा हूँ? देखिए, आई एम स्पीकिंग लाइक अ राइटर बिकॉज ये सब बात प्रैक्टिकल कर रहा हूँ अपनी लाइफ में. आई कैन से इन लिटरेचर डिस्कोर्स इज नॉट ओनली व्हाट इज सेड बट ऑल्सो हाउ, वाई एंड बाय whom it is said. That is more important. It operates in what stories are told, which voices are heard, and which are left out. I always say, as a writer, I do not control my characters. I do not. They control me and they take me away wherever they like. Now I say writers today, as discourse in the simplest form is more than language. It is the way language is used to shape thought, identity, and power. In literature, it is only what is said, but also why, how, why, and by whom it is said. It operates in what stories are told, which voices are heard, and which are left out. Which are left out. As the cultural and technological land, देखिए कुमार विश्वास तो इंजीनियरिंग छोड़कर आया था. हो सकता है मुझको सुनने के बाद कुछ लोग छोड़ दें इंजीनियरिंग और कवि बन जाए. कुमार विश्वास ने इंजीनियरिंग की पहला सेमेस्टर और छोड़ दिया. Now he is a poet. As the cultural and technological landscape changes, so too does literary discourse, both in its structure and its intent. Emerging literary practices are increasingly aware of the role of discourse in constructing realities. My dear friends, writers today are engaging with multiple discourses simultaneously. Sir, colonial, post-colonial, feminist, again queer, I am repeating again, queer, ecological, digital, often blending them within a single text. Sometimes you find everything in a text, right? Ecological things, magical realism, right? Emotional, post-colonial theory, even theory of Sigmund Freud, Karl Marx, everything you find. The result is more layered. Intersectional approach to storytelling, where language becomes a site of negotiation rather than neutrality. Sir, come on. In post-colonial literature, the act of writing back to the empire remains deeply embedded in discourse. Writers like, अब मैं नाम बोल रहा हूँ, अंगूगी वा चांगो, and Arundhati Rai challenge dominant historical narratives by weaving knowledge systems into their work, subverting ecocentric language patterns, and elevating previously silenced perspectives. Their texts create spaces of resistance where discourse becomes a powerful tool for reclaiming cultural identity. Similarly, gender-focused literature employs discourse to question and disrupt established social norms. Authors like Meena Khandasamy, Maggie Nelson, and Janet Winterson demonstrate a shift from viewing narrative as a mere structure to embracing it as a strategy, where identity emerges through linguistic choices and interactions rather than existing as something fixed or predetermined. My dear friends, digital platforms. Madam was talking about digital platforms. Digital platforms have dramatically transformed literary discourse. Social media, blogs, interactive fiction, and they have spawned new forms of expression that tend towards informality, multilingualism, fragmentation, and reader participation. Writers now engage directly with their audiences, blurring traditional boundaries between text and context. These digital spaces enable immediate engagement with democratizing literary expression and challenging established hierarchies in the literary world. Multimodal discourse, combining text with visual elements. Audio components increasingly appears in both literature and language education. I again talk about graphic novels. Visual poetry, spoken word performances, and hybrid digital storytelling reshape how narratives develop and how readers experience them. In academic settings, discourse analysis towards beyond formal linguistic study to inform literary theory, cultural studies, and media analysis. At its heart, studying discourse literature requires attentiveness to voices, both present and post. Sir, Sasdeva sir, decolonizing. My last point. Decolonizing literature in India represents an ongoing project as a completed text, right? One deeply connected to the country's colonial history and continuing struggles for cultural, linguistic, and intellectual autonomy. Though political independence arrived in 1947. In 1947, we got political independence, right? Colonial influence lingers in language hierarchies. Sir, White Man's Burden by Rudyard Kipling. Colonization, मैं तो कहता हूँ भारत के सारे इंग्लिश डिपार्टमेंट 90% colonized हैं, उपनिवेशवादी शिकार है मानसिकता के। और मैं हिंदी बोलो समझता है आदमी पढ़ा लिखा नहीं है। ये क्या है? कॉलोनियल मानसिकता। White Man's Burden, इसके लिए ताली की आवश्यकता है मुझे। जो अच्छा पॉइंट है हमें ताली बजनी चाहिए ना। Decolonization, sir. Decolonization process involves reclaiming narrative authority, questioning inherited standard, and centering voices historically marginalized by colonial powers, dominant castes. I was to Dalit literature, right? अब भी खबरें पढ़ रहे हैं आप, पढ़ते हैं क्या? गांव में दूल्हे को घोड़ी पर क्या है? And centering voices historically marginalized by colonial powers, dominant castes, patriarchal system, पितृसत्तात्मक समाज, and centralized language policies. क्या लड़ाई हो रही है तमिलनाडु में, साउथ में क्या हो रहा है? लैंग्वेज लड़ाई, नेता करा रहे हैं, कोई नहीं करा रहा. Indian writers have long resisted colonial literary dominance through both content choices and formal innovations. I remember Rabindranath Tagore. How can I complete my keynote without Rabindranath Tagore? We are proud of Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore, writing primarily in Bengali, championed regional language while engaging with global literary traditions. Writers like Bankim Chand Chatterjee, Sir Arbindo, and Toru Dutt, young poetess. She died at a very early age. Moved between English and vernacular languages with political awareness, embedding Indian themes, mythologies. Amish Tripathi. याद रखेंगे नाम? After independence, this resistance developed greater complexity. My dear friends, writers such as Mulk Raj Anand and Raja Rao, who wrote Kanthapura. राजा राव ने पहली बार कहा कि हम भारतीय लोग अंग्रेजों की तरह इंग्लिश ना बोलें ना लिखें, हम अपनी लैंग्वेज डेवलप करें. डोंट ट्राई टू इमिटेट ब्लाइंड एक्सेंट ऑफ ब्रिटिशर्स. राइटर्स लाइक मुल्कराज आनंद and Raja Rao explored marginalized experiences with questioning while questioning English dominance. I quote the words of Raja Rao. ये बात सेंटेंस आप याद रखिए बच्चों, बहुत मजा आएगा आपको. We cannot write like the English. We cannot write like the English. हम अंग्रेजों की तरह नहीं लिख सकते. We should not. We can only write as Indians. ये है मतलब की बात. मैं आपसे कह रहा हूं, अगर आप if you are fond of reading my novels, मैं novels पढ़ी है आपको, you find Indian English, Indian expression. मेरी टांग दबा दो, press my legs. Indians बोलते हैं, अंग्रेज नहीं बोलते. सारी गाली आपको इंडिया की मिलेंगी मेरी नॉवेल्स में. आप करिए, मजा आइए, मेरी नॉवेल पढ़िए. क्या मतलब? इंडियन सेंस, इंडियन इथोस, तभी मजा आएगा. राइट माय डियर फ्रेंड्स, आफ्टर इंडिपेंडेंस, today's Indian literature continues advancing this decolonial agenda. Writers including Arundhati Rai, Geeta Hariharan, right, Amitabh Ghosh engage critically with colonial archives, challenging imperialistic narratives through historical re-examination, linguistic innovation, and counter-hard memory. Meanwhile, Dalit writers Om Prakash Valmiki, Baburao Bagul offer decolonial challenges from within, confronting not only colonial structures but also caste hierarchies and Brahminical literary dominance. समझ में क्या बोल रहा हूँ? Their works disrupt notions of a monolithic Indian voice, emphasizing instead the necessity of multiple perspectives, resistance, and unflinching honesty. सचदेवा सर, आपने तो डिलीट कर रखी है मेरी तरह ही, और आप लिंग्विस्टिक्स के आदमी, विद्वान आदमी हैं. लिंग्विस्टिकली मैं आपके फील्ड में घुस रहा हूँ, मेरा फील्ड नहीं है. और मेरे फादर कहते हैं जिस फील्ड, किस अखाड़े में जीत ना पाओ वहाँ मत कूदो. मेरे फादर कहते हैं जिस अखाड़े में ना कूद पाओ उस अखाड़े में लड़ाई मत लड़ो. ये मेरा अखाड़ा नहीं है, लेकिन आई एम ट्राइंग टू पोक माई नोज. लिंग्विस्टिकली decolonizing Indian literature means validating regional languages and dialects that suffered suppression or devaluation during and after colonial rule. बच्चों में क्या कहना चाहता हूँ, हम हिंदी के पक्ष में नहीं मत बोलो, सारी भाषाएं रीजनल लैंग्वेजेस उन्हें प्रमोट करो. बंगाली पढ़ो, तमिल पढ़ो, कन्नड़ पढ़ो, रीजनल लैंग्वेजेस, instead of focusing on Spanish, German, and English, other French languages. Now, the continued privilege of English in publishing opportunities, educational settings, and prestige often sidelines vibrant literary traditions in language like Tamil, Malayalam, Assami, Maithili, Santhali. ये सारी भाषाएं, इनको क्या किया गया? ओवरलुक किया गया. ये मैं कहना चाहता हूँ. This is the gist of this keynote address. That regional languages, they are being sidelined, and our NEP emphasizes on the implementation and use these languages. We must learn English, but we must learn Bengali, Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, Punjabi, all languages. Decolonizing literature also involves reconsidering the imagined reader. Many contemporary Indian authors, अब आप ताली खूब बजाओ तब भी मैं बोलूँगा आपको, क्योंकि मैं I am accountable to रेखा दूत. Many contemporary Indian authors are no longer write with Western audience in mind. They incorporate regional language. खत्म कर रहा हूँ. I am finishing. Expressions, cultural references, untranslated terms, local rhythm. This refusal to over-explain represents a political stance asserting that Indian literature needs no colonial filter to establish its validity or value. In educational context, decolonization requires rethinking curricula that still prioritize British and American literary canons and the expense of local voices. Expense of local voices. Growing momentum supports centering vernacular literature, Dalit writing, Adivasi, tribal writing, right? Adivasi narratives and feminist text, right? Not as peripheral alternatives, but as fundamental to Indian literary identity. And the last but not least, these emerging practices, I am confining to this topic. These emerging practices carry significant implications across disciplines. Literary scholars must develop fresh critical approaches that understand text both as products of cultural circumstances as catalysts for change. Linguists need frameworks acknowledging linguistic hybridity and evolution. Educational institutions face pressure to adopt curricula incorporating these innovations. Publishers and culture organizations confront challenge supporting works that transcend conventional categories. I give one example. जब मैंने बुक लिखी LGBT पर, तो इंडिया का कोई पब्लिशर पब्लिश करने को तैयार ही नहीं हुआ, समझे? अब बुक छपी फिलीपींस से. More broadly, these practices reflect shifting conceptions of authorship, readership, and textuality in our digital age, where the very nature of text undergoes constant transformation. There is a quiet but powerful shift happening in literature, and I feel this work fits right into that evolving space. These stories do not just reflect the challenges women face, they actively engage with them, offering grounded, often uncomfortable, but necessary conversations about justice, autonomy, and identity. What is most striking is how these narratives and sensationalism, indeed, they stay rooted in real-world situations, letting the strength and struggles of the characters speak for themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your gracious words and thoughtful expression. So, Srivastav sir has recollected few poetic words and he would like to share with us.
I would like to express my sincerest thanks and it is a great opportunity to be with Dr. Vikas Sharma ji. आज का ये सेशन जो उन्होंने दिया, इसमें बहुत सारे टेक अवे हैं, बहुत सारी चीज़ें उन्होंने कहीं और आई थिंक कि ये चीज़ बिल्कुल इम्पॉसिबल थी, विच हैज़ बीन मेड पॉसिबल बाय सचदेवा साहब एंड रेखा धूत जी. सो प्रेजेंस ऑफ विकास शर्मा जी, विल अगेन ऑल ऑफ अस शुड गिव ए स्टैंडिंग ओवेशन टू विकास शर्मा जी. दूसरा, विकास शर्मा जी ने दो टेक अवे पॉइंट मेरे को मिले. एक तो इन्होंने कहा कल्चरल इंडिविजुअलिटी, पूरा फोकस रहा एक कल्चरल इंडिविजुअलिटी के ऊपर कि हम कुछ भी हो जाए अपनी इंडिविजुअलिटी, अपनी वननेस और वन सेल्फ को, अपने सेल्फ को कभी भी अंडर एस्टिमेट ना करें, अपनी इंडिविजुअलिटी में विश्वास करें. दूसरा, लिटरेचर को लेके उन्होंने कहा इंडियनाइज्ड इंग्लिश, कि हम अपने को भारतीय इंग्लिश का इंडियनाइजेशन करें, हम अपनी नेचुरल भाषा में बोलें, जो नेचर से आता है, नेचुरली कनेक्ट करें एक दूसरे से. तो इस पर मैं दो शेर विकास जी के लिए अर्ज कर रहा हूँ कि एक तो इंडिविजुअलिटी के ऊपर कि मुझसे मेरी खुददारी छीन ले, मुझसे मेरी खुददारी छीन ले, मुझे ऐसा निवाला नहीं चाहिए, और जिस दिए में जले तेल चंदे का मुझे ऐसा उजाला नहीं चाहिए. मुझसे मेरी खुददारी छीन ले, मुझे ऐसा निवाला नहीं चाहिए, और जिस दिए में जले तेल चंदे का मुझे ऐसा उजाला नहीं चाहिए. दूसरा, एक और शेर इन्हीं के लिए अर्ज है. आज का टेक्निकल सेशन, ऑल इंजीनियर्स सिटिंग हियर. सो जो एआई से जो चैलेंजेस आ रहे हैं, जो मैंने एक कॉल अपन किया आप सारे लोगों से कि जो आने वाला चैलेंज, जिस तरह से फिजिकल इनएक्टिविटी बढ़ रही है, उस तरह से आपकी मेंटल डिपेंडेंस कहीं एआई पे ना चला जाए, ये एक बहुत बड़ा थ्रेट है. तो इसके ऊपर मैं एक शेर अर्ज कर रहा हूँ आप सभी के सामने कि होठों पे शेर अर्ज है एआई के ऊपर, जो रिसेंट थ्रेट्स हैं बिफोर अस, जो चैलेंजेस हैं. होठों पे हंसी देख ली, होठों पे हंसी देख ली, अंदर नहीं देखा, और यारों ने मेरे गम का समंदर नहीं देखा। होठों पे हंसी देख ली, एआई की एडवांटेजेस सबने देख लिए, चैट जीपीटी को एंजॉय कर रहे हैं, एआई से ही सारे प्रोग्रामिंग भी लिखना शुरू कर दिया लोगों ने। लेकिन इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि हम उसकी लैंग्वेज को हमें आता ना हो, हमारा कमांड छूट जाए। तो होठों पे हंसी देख ली, अंदर नहीं देखा, और यारों ने मेरे गम का समंदर नहीं देखा। और शीशे के मकान तुमने बना तो लिए हैं दोस्त, शीशे के मकान तुमने बना तो लिए हैं दोस्त, लेकिन समय के हाथ का पत्थर नहीं देखा, लेकिन समय के हाथ का पत्थर नहीं देखा। और जैसे विकास शर्मा जी ने शुरुआत आज की लिटरेचर्स, और आज बहुत हम प्राउड मोमेंट है कि उन्होंने कालिदास जी का भी महिमा मंडन किया। वाकई में 50 किलोमीटर दूर कालिदास जी की भूमि है, उनका स्थान है, इसके बावजूद हम उनको इतना नहीं समझ पाए जिस ढंग से आपने उनको समझाया कि क्या उनकी पकड़ थी इवन नेचर के प्रति। ठीक है, तो इस पर एक बहुत सारी बातें हुई। मैं कहता हूँ कि पोथी पढ़ पढ़ जग मुआ, पंडित भया न कोय, पोथी पढ़ पढ़ जग मुआ, पंडित भया न कोय, और ढाई आखर प्रेम के पढ़े सो पंडित होए। तो अब ढाई आखर प्रेम के पढ़े सो पंडित होए नहीं, ढाई आखर प्रेम के पढ़े, प्रेम से पढ़े सो पंडित होए। जब भी करो पैशन से करो। तो योगा कर्म सुकौशलम, आप जो भी कार्य करें पूरी कुशलता से साथ करें, योजनाबद्ध तरीके से काम करें, बाय वैल्यूइंग नॉलेज स्किल। आप अपना इन 3 एम्ब्लेम के जो साइन है, नॉलेज स्किल्स एंड वैल्यूज़, उनमें विश्वास करें। रेस्ट अश्योर्ड सक्सेस इन योर हैंड्स। थैंक यू सो मच।
Thank you, sir, for sharing the share. Definitely, it was an inspiring and motivating one.
हमारे डॉक्टर विकास शर्मा जी के लिए, प्रोफेसर के लिए मैं 2 लाइन बोलूंगा, एक शेर। माना कि उसके हाथ एक खाली गिलास है, माना कि उसके हाथ एक खाली गिलास है, पर इतना तो इत्मीनान है कि वो सुराही के पास है। तो हमारे सर, इन्होंने जो आज समुद्र मंथन किया, he delved deep into the knowledge of ocean। ये जो उनकी एकेडमिक एक्सरसाइज थी, ये एक अकेला रिसर्च पेपर नहीं था। इट वॉज ए मल्टी फ्लोर्ड, मल्टी लेवल अपार्टमेंट, 50 मंजिली, 60 मंजिली, जिसमें ही टच्ड अपॉन ऑलमोस्ट एवरी नूक एंड कॉर्नर ऑफ द बेस्ट इमर्जिंग प्रैक्टिसेस, लैंग्वेज लिंग्विस्टिक्स से लेकर, इंटरसेक्शनलिटी से लेकर LGBT तक। ये लंबा सफर एक रिसर्च पेपर में समाना मुश्किल था। विद दिस वी हैव ए हाई सैल्यूट टू द ग्रेट एक्सपर्टाइज ऑफ डॉक्टर विकास शर्मा। एक बार फिर से स्टैंडिंग ओरेशन, तालियां, ग्रेट अपलॉज फॉर डॉक्टर विकास शर्मा। वी रियली सैल्यूट टू योर नॉलेज सर। यू हैव, सही मायने में ये की नोट एड्रेस था विच जस्टिफाइड द टाइटल, इजंट इट? थैंक यू सो मच। इसके बाद मेरा प्लेनरी लेक्चर है, लेकिन ड्यू टू द पॉजिटी ऑफ टाइम वी आर हार्डली लेफ्ट विद 10 मिनट्स, सो सीम्स वेरी डिफिकल्ट। मैं पूरी क्लास लेने आया था, पीपीटी यहाँ दी हुई है, पर संभव नहीं दिखता। तो थोड़ी सी बातें मैं बस शेयर करना चाहूँगा आपसे कि एआई पे भी बहुत सारी बात हुई, और एक अच्छी बात यह है कि आप इंजीनियरिंग स्टूडेंट्स के साथ साथ देयर आर almost 280 participants, teachers and researchers who are connected with this conference online, and they are attending this conference. So आपके साथ साथ उनके लिए, उनको भी जस्टिफाई करना ज़रूरी है। तो मैं ये बताना चाहता हूँ कि आजकल टीचिंग और रिसर्च में जनरल बातें ही बोलूँगा, आई लीव असाइड, बहुत सारे सॉफ्टवेयर लेके आया था मैं, बहुत सारे टीचिंग और रिसर्च के जो डिजिटल टूल्स हैं जिनका यूज़ किया जा सकता है, बट आई विल कन्फाइन माई सेल्फ टू द वेरी जैसा कि हम कहते हैं, बात ज़रा हुई कि आज के ज़माने में द टीचर AI and digital technology cannot replace. Digital technology or technology cannot replace a teacher, a human being. But if a teacher is technologically equipped, well trained, will certainly replace a teacher, the one who is not. So technology, आज के ज़माने we have to keep pace with the time. एक बार गूगल और ऑनलाइन और इंटरनेट आया था, lot of criticism came up, और फिर हमने गूगल को भी एक्सेप्ट कर लिया, और फिर अब ऑनलाइन इंटरनेट से चीज़ें लेके आते थे. नाउ दिस इज द टाइम ऑफ द AI, बट अल्टीमेटली वी हैव टू एक्सेप्ट artificial intelligence also. We have to accept these tools. They have come to our support, but there are pros and cons. There are disadvantages as well. Because अभी अगर आप चैट जीपीटी से कुछ लिखते हैं तो आप चैट जीपीटी में देखेंगे कि उसका जो तरीका होता है लिखने का, that is highly robotic, that is highly mechanized, और उसमें certain cliches are there, stock phrases are there, और उसके अंदर एक particular structure follow होती है. A sentence is there, it is followed by a gerund construction. And उसको अगर आप टेस्ट करेंगे AI डिटेक्टर से, there are plenty of tools, plagiarism tools and AI detectors, जो ये बताते हैं कि आप AI से लिख के ला रहे हैं चैट जीपीटी से. तो एक ऐसे बुक है जो अंग्रेजी सीखने के लिए भी बहुत अच्छी है, और उसको मैं बड़ा अच्छा मानता हूँ, स्कूल चिल्ड्रन के लिए बहुत अच्छी है. उसमें डॉक्टर रघुकुल तिलक हुआ करते थे हमारे इंग्लिश लिटरेचर की बुक्स में. उसने सर एक ऐसे बुक लिखी, राजहंस इंग्लिश एसेस. उन एसेस की खास बात यह है कि उसके अंदर इडियोमेटिक इंग्लिश लिखी हुई है, फ्रेजल वर्ब्स के यूज किए हुए हैं, प्रोवर्ब्स के यूज किए हैं, और अलग अलग नए फ्रेजेस यूज किए हैं, जिससे हम जो दिल की भाषा जो निकलती है, जो एक्सप्रेशन निकलता है, वो चैट जीपीटी से पॉसिबल नहीं है. और ह्यूमनाइज करने के लिए जो व्हेन इट इज़ द ओवरफ्लो ऑफ योर पावरफुल फीलिंग्स एंड योर इंटेलेक्ट, व्हेन इट कम्स डाउन टू योर पेन एंड पेपर, टू द फ्लोज डाउन टू द पेपर, उस लैंग्वेज के अलग आजकल ये बहुत ज़ोरदार डिमांड उठी है कि आपकी लैंग्वेज ह्यूमनाइज होना चाहिए, क्योंकि AI डिटेक्टर से मालूम पड़ जाता है. तो इडियोमेटिक इंग्लिश, द फ्रेजल वर्ब्स, द प्रोवर्ब्स, कोटेशंस. आजकल एक नया दौर है. सर हैज़ ऑल्सो टॉक्ड अबाउट लिंग्विस्टिक्स, स्टाइलिस्टिक्स, बहुत सारी शैली के बात भी ऊपर बात की उन्होंने, शैली विज्ञान पर. आजकल नियोलॉजिज्म्स का दौर है. अगर आप टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया उठा के पढ़ें या फ्री प्रेस, आपको आराम से 25 नियोलॉजिज्म मिल जाएंगे. वो वर्ड जिन्होंने आज ही जन्म लिया है, द एक्सप्रेशंस दैट हैव नॉट बीन हर्ड बिफोर, दे हैव नॉट बीन अटर्ड बिफोर. क्योंकि लैंग्वेज में बड़ी प्रोडक्टिविटी, क्रिएटिविटी और इन्फानाइट इमेंस पॉसिबिलिटीज होती हैं. जैसे कुछ एग्जांपल्स आप भी जानते हैं, इन द वर्ल्ड ऑफ एडवर्टाइजमेंट, इन द वर्ल्ड ऑफ एडवर्टाइजमेंट, इन द वर्ल्ड ऑफ क्रिएटिव फील्ड, the creative writers and the philosophers, the scholars, they are always look out for the new words. The new words are coming into. अगर आप इंग्लिश न्यूज़पेपर पढ़ रहे हैं तो टाइटल्स में ही आपको नए वर्ड्स मिल जाएंगे, शॉर्ट एंड फॉर्म्स मिल जाएंगे. जैसे फेब्युलस और फैंटास्टिक, तो नया वर्ड आ गया फैंटाबुलस. एडवर्टाइजमेंट एंड एंटरटेनमेंट तो एजिटेनमेंट. और इसकी इतनी ज़्यादा है कि मैं कहता हूँ हज़ारों वर्ड्स, thousands of words are being created every day, और कुछ डिक्शनरीज में भी शामिल हो रहे हैं. इस लिस्ट बहुत लंबी चौड़ी है. अब ऐसे ही कुछ मैंने 50 एक वर्ड्स मैंने भी बनाए थे, जिसे हम कहें, एक एग्जाम्पल देता हूँ कि नियोलॉजिज्म कैसे बनते हैं. इनका भी एक बड़ा प्रोसेस है, उस पर मैंने प्रोजेक्ट किया है, UGC का मेजर प्रोजेक्ट. जैसे हम कहें, हम सोचते हैं, वी थिंक, और एक होता है वी एक्ट. तो ऐसा कोई वर्ड नहीं है जो दोनों को मिला के कहे कि थिंक एंड एक्ट. तो थिंक और एक्ट, तो हमने एक नया शब्द बना दिया, थैक्ट, isn't it? That you are, what are you doing these days? I am thacting these days. और who is he? He is a thacter. He thinks and act. Think tank भी है और acting भी करते हैं. She is a thactress. It is a thactable. या इस तरह से नए वर्ड्स देयर मॉर्फोलॉजिकल वर्ड डेरिवेशंस होते हैं. मैं AI के बारे में भी बहुत सारी बात करना चाह रहा था. आजकल लोगों ने ये कहना शुरू कर दिया कि ऐसे नियोलॉजिज्म्स का हम ट्रैक रखें. दूसरा, आजकल ये कहने में आ रहा है कि गूगल इज़ नाउ डेड, गूगल इज़ ऑलमोस्ट डेड. हालांकि डेड नहीं हो सकता, क्योंकि गूगल इज़ अ बिग पावरफुल फिश. दे से गूगल इज़ डेड. अब गूगल से अगर आप सर्च करने जाते हैं, रिसर्चर्स और टीचर्स के लिए बात, तो बहुत सारी वेबसाइट्स खोल देता है. आप मैन्युअली एक वेबसाइट्स पे जाओगे, देखोगे, सर्च करोगे मैटर, विच इज़ वेरी टाइम कंज्यूमिंग. और आज के ज़माने में देयर इज़ ए फ्लड ऑफ नॉलेज. और एवरी सेकंड द नॉलेज इज बीइंग अपडेटेड, और क्रांति आई हुई है। इतने सारे रिसर्च पेपर और बुक्स लॉन्च हो रही हैं ऑनलाइन और ऑफलाइन कि अगर आप रिसर्च करेंगे तो एक ज़िंदगी कम है, एक तो कम जिंदगानी, उस पर से भी कम है वक्त रिसर्च करने का, फिर रूटीन लाइफ, जिम्मेदारियां, रोजी रोटी, बहुत सारी चीज़ें होती हैं। तो ऐसे में रिसर्च और पढ़ाई करने के लिए अगर हम गूगल पे जाएं तो वो तो लाखों किताबें दे देता है हमारे सामने उसी टॉपिक पे, हाउ टू डू रिसर्च। तो यहाँ AI कम्स टू योर रेस्क्यू। कैसे, किस तरह से, वो बाद में बात करेंगे। अब गूगल इज डेड, तो अब गूगल इज बीइंग रिप्लेस्ड बाय डीप सर्च मॉडल्स, डीप सर्च इंजिन्स आ गई हैं, दे टेलर टू द सूट। AI एजेंट्स आ गए हैं आपके सामने। AI agent is making your research projects and your own research and teaching much easier. AI agent को एक task दे दिया, इस AI agent को। So deep learning models, और language में तो बड़ी revolution आ गई है आजकल। मैडम ने जैसे बताया, she is from computer field, तो जैसे कि उन्होंने बताया कि, और इस तरह से आप देखेंगे कि बड़ी लैंग्वेज में रिवॉल्यूशन आई। जैसे चैट GPT आया, उसके बाद तहलका मच गया कि डीप सीक आ गया, अमेरिका की इकोनॉमी कुछ दिनों के लिए शेयर मार्केट गिर गया और ट्रम्प के होश उड़ गए। डीप सीक के बाद फिर ग्रोक आ गया, फिर इसके बाद हमारे पास रिसर्च मॉडल परप्लेक्सिटी है। तो इनका कैसे, इनके अपने प्रॉस एंड कॉन्स है। अब चैट GPT में आप देखेंगे शुरू का पैरा तो पूरा हटा दीजिए, सुपरफिशियल बकवास है, आखिरी भी हटा दीजिए। 300 वर्ड्स में से 30 वर्ड काम के आपको मिलते हैं। तो आप इसको रिसर्च के लिए, आप डीप रिसर्च के लिए, और डीप रिसर्च मॉडल आ गए हैं, तो डीप रिसर्च मॉडल्स को यूज़ कीजिए और उससे मैटर कलेक्ट कीजिए और उसको देन यू कैन यूज़ इन योर ओन वे। तो आई थिंक वी आर रनिंग शॉर्ट ऑफ टाइम। आई हैव स्टॉप्ड शोइंग यू माई PPT. I stop here and thank you for patient listening to our keynote speech, which was ऐसा keynote speech मैंने अपनी लाइफ में नहीं सुना आज तक। मैं आपको I go to the and I appreciate Dr. Vikas Sharma. He is a very busy academician. His programs are lined up throughout the year. And अभी यहाँ से जाने के बाद फिर इनको कहीं यूपी जाना है, कहीं और जाना है, and he has all the academic keynote addresses and endeavors lined up. So he came on our request, on the request of IPS Academy and our personal request. He was kind enough and he's very down to earth. You can see, might have noticed that his quest for knowledge, his down to earth, his humbleness is what, and your knowledge, sir, we salute you. Thank you so much. I stop here today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are profoundly grateful for your words of encouragement. We would like to give a short introduction of Dr. Ashok Sachdeva. Professor Dr. Ashok Sachdeva is a doctor in literature and English and professor of English at Department of Higher Education. 30 research scholars have been awarded doctorate degree under his supervision. He has published 18 books and 40 research papers. We thank all the dignitaries and we request all the dignitaries to join us for lunch. Thank you.